Okay, so this is it, the start.
I'm gonna backtrack a little, right?
We're going to do screen share. Here we go. And why doesn't this work? Oh, I know why it doesn't work. Just a sec. I have to take it out of this. I put it into slideshow mode. Hold on. Let me go back to. Okay. Here we go. Let's see. So this is the purpose of the course. We had the different topics we're going to be covering here that we went through. The only reason for running through these quickly is I have added a couple of things along the way. So we have, you'll see it coming up here. The prologue. Oh, here it is here. We have a whole bunch of books that we cited, and Marjorie has gone off and amassed. You want to grab some of them?
I was afraid some were missing. They were just scattered around, so.
There's more books than just these. We just want to show you.
So I just got to throw in, Bart, that in between Coleridge and Emerson was my ancestor, James Marsh, who was the 5th president of the University of Vermont. And he published Coleridge in 1829. And he's known as the father of American Transcendentalism.
Wow.
So James Marsh?
Yep.
Okay, we'll go look him up.
My mother taught them a unit of them. It was an elective in a public high school in Norwalk, Connecticut, which is very unusual in that it's so integrated. That's why they moved here from New York.
So this is the first book, the I Ching. This is the translation by Wilhelm, which is the one that Jung has climbed all over.
He wrote the introduction, and that's the classic. But there's other more modern ones that I think are more accessible, but that's a real classic.
And then this is Synchronicity that Jung wrote with working with Pauli, and we'll end up covering this. And we had this one here, which is actually on the screen, Adam and Archetype, which is the letters, 89 letters between Jung and Pauli between 1932 and 1957. And then this is Ira Prigoff's book, Progoff, on writing about what Jung wrote about synchronicity, but it has his own interpretation, and it's very readable, so recommend that. And then finally, the Tao of Physics, which is what this class really started from.
I think we shared with you last time or the time before that we realized we had 3 really unusual books in common. And that's why we decided to do the class.
And then this is a book that Jung wrote. It was actually, it's rare. Marjorie has an actual paper version of this. It's called the Red Book, Liber Novus. And Jung wrote this when he was I would guess he was in some sort of psychedelic state. I don't know how to describe it.
Some people thought it was a psychotic breakdown, but he still managed to see clients during the day, a modified schedule, but he was in and out of trances.
But here you see just an example of everything in here Jung painted.
These incredible paintings.
Yeah,
And this book is like, what would you say? That's like 3 feet tall.
yeah, and it weighs 20 pounds.
And it's just full of his paintings, some of which we've blown up to frame. But they're just
They're very surreal.
kind of hallucinogenic almost.
This is I don't know, a gigantic snake, but it instead of having legs, it has arms everywhere sticking out of it that it uses to get around. And so it goes. So this is the sort of books we're looking at. Here are these two books that we just showed you, that the Tao of Physics and Progoff's book. Here comes Nina.
Nina, what's she doing here?
And then Growth and Form and Hamlet's Mill. And then we saw the little movie on the double slit experiment. And then we saw Ron Cowan's explanation based on his observations of what was really going on in the double slit experiment.
So this is why we decided we had to do the class, because we had all of these odd, obscure books in common.
Right.
So we just decided, well, more people should.
Right. Right.
So we would just love it if people would start reading and see what they had to say. Jung is one of the most incredible scholars. He just.
Jung always struck me as being born in the 19th century. His professional life was in the 20th century, but it's only in the 21st century he's going to get real appreciation. That's my 2 cents.
Mm.
So we covered through just the issue of foundations, the basic problem we have here, which is when we have religion, science, and art and mysticism, everybody has different vocabularies, and how in the world can you even begin to have a common ground for talking about things? I just added this as an example. For example, many people dismiss the Bible as scientifically inaccurate. They say, well, science really addresses the what and how, and religion deals with the why. So those are separate realms. Or there's conflicts that occur. And if there's any contradictions between science or religion, science wins, which is strange. We have.
But I just gotta say, I've been really, the last couple of years, I've really been looking at the book of John, and it's the Gospel of John. It's really about metaphysics. It's there is so much.
It is. It's very different than the other 3 Gospels. And there's 66 books in the Bible. The book of John is Gospel of John is very different. So the basic cop-out that most Christian Protestant faiths come up with is this last one, that the Bible and nature both display the words of God, and therefore they give testimony to God's handiwork. So the nature around us, you would think something created it, we'll call that thing God. And the Bible says that God indeed created all of this. So with that, then there's no more discussion in any sort of meaningful way of what in the world is going on here. There's also just the fact that science has all of these different silos or specialties, and then there's a huge amount of resistance on the science side to Genesis, in particular books, verses 1 to 11, which goes into, in the beginning, there was nothing, and then all of a sudden there was something. So what in the world was this? So that's where we're starting out. There's just a lack of willingness to talk to one another. We spent some time on the science side. The thing to take away from here, we're going to cover this, but the thing that's crazy is what I labeled here as symplectic geometry, which is dealing with complex numbers, where we have something that we call real that goes in this direction here, and something that we call imaginary, which is real except it's multiplied by the square root of -1, and it goes this way. And the two of them together end up giving us one single complex dimension, which seems to be how the world is put together, based on all of the things that Ron Cowan was able to observe. We touched on these things of compactified dimensions, which we'll get into more later. The fact that time is strange. The main thing with time is that we all think we live in the now, in the instant of the now. The past has been gone, it's behind us and it's receding, and the future lies ahead of us. So it's really only the now or the present that exists. And this is actually wrong, as we'll see. We also touched on Eastern philosophies here, which we're gonna come back to all these things in this section. And we touched on the observations of Annie Besant and Charles Leadbeater that ended up looking into the microcosm, into the nucleus of atoms, just with pure meditation, and that they came up with their ability to do this was based on intense meditation that they found through the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. Patanjali said there's your innermost part, or your true self, and then your outer part, which is called this ego or illusory self, which is not real. And it's your mind and your ego. And the whole point in the Yoga Sutras was to master the ways that the ego or the knowledge of the true self makes pure awareness available. Now,
Talk a little bit about who Patanjali was.
well, Patanjali was the person that apparently wrote down the Yoga Sutras around 0 AD, except that they'd been in existence for thousands of years before that. No one knows how long they'd been there. And they're very short, 2, 3, 5 words of Sanskrit for each sutra. Which
is like an instructional poem.
And they're short enough to memorize, therefore. So most of the West focuses on the early sutras, the first 50, the first book of the Yoga Sutras, dealing with all the postures and stretching and trying to learn how to calm down or meditate. And the illusory side of things that Patanjali was talking about was that you have what Western science calls valid knowledge, and then you have invalid knowledge, which you arise through fantasy or through prejudice or whatever, and so forth. But the key thing is he's focusing on a dreamless sleep where there's no spiritual awareness or no hang-ups and all these things. And I think I put in here, Bruce had a nice, I don't see it. Oh, we'll come back to it. But what we have here is the notion out of Buddhism of the duality. You have your mind and your soul, a dual entity. And the issue is to achieve non-duality, to merge so that you can have complete knowledge. And my perception of what that would be is we live in these 4 dimensions of space and time, but there are these other compactified dimensions that are right next to us that we'll come to. So you're actually merging into your non-duality is actually giving you access to all of this here, and your notion of self therefore disappears. Bruce, do you want to expand on this? You know, I liked what you had to say, and I thought I put it in here, but I just can't find it. Oh, you're on mute. You're on, yeah.
Okay. In terms of the Buddhist understanding, it's like there's two minds. One is conditioned mind, and the other is natural mind. They call it natural mind because when it finds you, or you find it, it's more like it finds you, it feels entirely natural, normal, and the classic saying is, it's all the negatives have disappeared as if they never existed in the first place. So what happens is when you have realization from having a self to non-duality, whatever it was before just entirely disappears. And you can't even bring it back. It's as if it never existed in the first place. That's the actual experience of it. But the natural mind includes pure perception. What you see on the inner is actually what's really there, rather than what the self wanted you to see. It's very important, and all kinds of wonderful qualities like clarity and certainty and things like that.
The clarity and the certainty comes about because once you can access these higher realms, these compactified dimensions, you're linked into the entire rest of the universe. All of these things here are very tightly coupled. And so the certainty that you obtain there is really seeing everything that's going on everywhere. Everything interacts with everything else, no matter how far away it is. Might be very faint, but you can sense all this.
Well, that's one of the qualities of the non-duality is union. You're in union with the universe. It's more what it's like, and it's just there. And all these wonderful realities, including love and things like that, arise instantly from that deeper world, which is where you've been forever already. So it's already natural, already real, feels very normal, totally effortless. That's sort of what it's like. The other thing that disappears is, of course, the self. And the other part that disappears when the self disappears is other. Because your world changes. So you see my own experience of it, you see the world in terms of a very profound, deeper love mind that covers everything. So everything is, well, not union is the best word for it.
Union.
Yeah, this is the sort of thing they talk about in the field of Buddhism called Mahamudra.
Right. Right. So this is what we'll try and pick up on when we get there.
Okay.
So we're finally getting to the the third topic we're going to cover are transcendentalists, and we'll try and go back and include Bud's uncle, great uncle, whatever. Marsh.
Yeah, but six or seven, great. He was really great.
Okay. So in the United States, we start with Emerson, and there are two fundamental things that we touch on here. One was an address that he made to the graduating class in 1838 at the Harvard Divinity School. And the Harvard Divinity School at that point in time might as well have been called the Unitarian Divinity School. It just focused so much on Unitarianism. And the thing that Emerson argued for was to go back to the teachings of Jesus of Nazareth as fundamental, and all of the fluff and ritual that the church has is not fundamental. For his reward for doing this was he was blackballed by the Unitarians and by the Harvard Divinity School administration, for the rest of his life. Emerson also read the Bhagavad Gita, and he was strongly influenced by this and led him to realizing how much truth there was in this Hindu epic. So we'll come back to that as well. Do you want to add anything here?
No.
Okay. The Bhagavad Gita has this battle in it with Prince Arjuna, who's talking to his charioteer, Krishna, that's the actual source of all things. And he's really wondering, here is this battle is about to take place, and all of these people, many of them are Arjuna's friends, are going to die. And Krishna says, don't worry about it. It's already done. They're already dead. And just continue on. In other words, he's viewing time as something that's an illusion in a certain sense, and that there's this unchanging reality or this collective unconscious that is controlling everything, that's hidden behind what we see going on, say, in this battlefield, in this incredible change. And the infinite unchanging reality that's really there, everybody senses. That's what I believe achieving enlightenment takes you there. You can in fact sense the true reality, or as Bruce says, the non-duality. There's no longer mind and soul. You're now one, and the notion of self disappears. So the purpose of life is really to experience this one reality, and this means to discover God. The soul that's here is the thing that's in fact eternal. It travels from body to body, attaches at birth and leaves at death, and the rebirth of it is certain. So even those that are going to die in this battle are going to be reborn. And this had an incredible impact on Emerson, but it still is the basis for Hinduism and everything that happens there. Now, Emerson was one of the first, but we have other Western mystics. We have Walt Whitman and Emily Dickinson that were later Transcendentalists. incredible insights into the nature of yourself and the world around you. And then we start to go off into other things, the Tao of physics. And there were other books that were takeoffs on this, like this Dancing Wu-Li Masters. The Tao of physics was written in 1975 because physics had hit a roadblock.
To reverse.
Yeah. All of the actions, all of the activities that physics had come up with to explain the world around had kind of hit the wall. And this book was written to say, well, we should also look to the East. The East has its own approach to this, and we should benefit from this. 50 years later, here we are in 2021, most of the physicists out there have said, forget it. They haven't followed this path, which is the path that Ron Cowan took, trying to explain using Eastern techniques like meditation to observe what's really going on. A different book out of the East, the I Ching, we end up cover this later on and try and do some participation to actually see what we can come up with.
We did a reading last year.
If you remember last year, we actually did a reading. And other different side of things out of the East, again, is just the meditation that the Buddha has taught, the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. And in particular, when we go into book 3, Patanjali observes that you can, under intense meditation, develop special skills, such as clairvoyance, where you can look out into the far reaches of space or look into the microcosm. But these are argued by Patanjali to be distractions. Do you really want to concentrate much more on trying to achieve enlightenment and greater levels of compassion and love? But these skills are nice little skills. Jesus of Nazareth clearly had this in that he was clairvoyant. He told his disciples that he was going to die in 3 days and arise from the dead, which he did. He predicted the fall of the temple in Jerusalem, which happened 70 AD, and so forth. And he had other traits as well, such as being able to heal the sick or the ability to walk on water. The Kabbalah we'll touch on, which we have the symbol for the tree of life. The most yeah, Bud, go ahead.
I just want to jump in for a second. The amazing thing that I just learned about the fall of the temple was the veil between the inner and the outer sanctum was rent from top to bottom. Because if it had been rent from bottom to top, it could have been an earthquake. If being from top to bottom, there's no way it could have been an earthquake. But it was also the separation between this existence, this entity, and heaven, or the next world, or the next universe, whatever you want to call it. That rent that separation.
Right. Yeah, the other thing that it signified, though, was it was the end of the first covenant, the covenant between the Jews and God, with the Jews being special. And the second covenant was that of Jesus of Nazareth, who died for everybody, not just for the Jews, but asked for people to believe in him. The other thing about the Kabbalah that we'll see is it has a lot of ties to what modern theoretical physics calls string theory, which appears to be a theory that describes fundamental particles and how they interact with and create the world around us. So the Kabbalah would be much more, I guess we would call it Western mysticism, simply because it came out of Judaism. And then the final thing to keep in mind in the West is the lost Gospels and the Gnostics, the knowledge that came out of this, that is leading to what again we call Western mysticism. And the lost Gospel. Go ahead.
You?
Yeah, go ahead.
No, I don't have to.
No? Okay.
Hold on.
You said hold on.
No, it's okay. You guys go ahead. I have to log off. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
In section 5, we're going to deal with Jung and his notion of archetypes. We'll see if we can get an outside speaker again here. But
And Jung considered himself to be a Gnostic.
right, yeah. Jung considered himself to be a Gnostic, but the people in his neighborhood considered him to be a warlock. He would cast spells and do other things that the Swiss didn't approve of. But he came up with this notion of complexes and of being extroverted and introverted. And the archetypes that he came up with, these images, show up again and again in mythology. Joseph Campbell is a person that popularized these things. Do you want to say anything? No. And we have this just a bullet points here, this notion of persona. There's a shadow, there's an ego, and underlying it all is the collective unconscious. This is everywhere and influences everything, controls everything. If there is something you would call God, I would call it the collective unconscious, according to Jung. And then we have the male and female side of things and the notion of the self and self-individuating through a mix of these archetypes. So it's go ahead.
Can I just say one thing? Would we call the collective unconscious that Jung talked about today, people are using the term consciousness? Would that be the equivalent, the modern version of his term?
No, because it's unconscious.
Okay.
There's the collective consciousness also. And that's where we have, conscious collective attitudes.
Okay.
The unconscious we're not as aware of, but it's where the archetypes really live in us. So like every culture has some kind of a goddess Diana kind of thing.
I guess what I'm thinking is that the way to get to the collective unconscious or the unconscious is through being conscious. I know that seems kind of contradictory, but it feels like how else do you get to it?
Through meditation.
Yeah, exactly.
And study, really,
Yeah.
I think it really takes study and learning and
So
looking
thank
at
you.
it.
Yeah.
But it's said to be where, like all the myths that kind of inform our lives culturally come from the collective unconscious, and that we're living out those stories that really, the myths live us, But one thing that you can see when you look at a chart from this perspective as an astrologer is which myths are prominent in a person's life. And they're just likely to be like themes and patterns for that person that they keep reliving the themes that are prominent in their chart in the planetary configurations. And why should that be, tied to their time of birth and place of birth and so on? We don't know, but it does seem to be the case. And it's just interesting that every culture associates the character of Mars with the planet, the red fiery planet, Mars. It's usually masculine, it's usually very yang, it's usually the warrior. It usually represents anger. And all across the board of every culture. So those are examples of the collective unconscious expressing itself in our, it comes out in our traditional artwork. But some people become they call it consumed by an archetype. And that has a certain, I felt that Trump was kind of consumed by an archetype. He wasn't really like an individual anymore. He was just kind of living out some instinctive pattern. It wasn't, and representing it, very large, but it just always seemed to me like there was nobody really home there.
He's possessed.
He was possessed.
Yeah.
That's the term they use, that you're
Yeah.
possessed by an archetype.
And the thing that Ron Cowan saw was this notion of information that's everywhere in these compactified dimensions, and it's encompasses the surface of matter, things like the electron that we talked about. And so this goes back to what Jesus of Nazareth said, that everything that you know is within you. Everything that I'm teaching you, you already know. It's already within you to know this, because you are part of this collective unconscious, even though you might not realize it.
But we can tap into it and become more conscious.
Right.
That a lot of people would say that is the endeavor of being human. That's the aim of it, is to become as conscious as possible.
Now, the other thing that Jung did, we mentioned the I Ching, where he was active in getting this chap Wilhelm to go translate the I Ching. And Jung didn't stop there. That was in 1930. And when the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered, Jung was all over this and got them to get these into a library, the Nag Hammadi library, and to make these things available for scholars, for them to look at these scrolls and see what in the world it was written in a time that was very close to the time period when Jesus of Nazareth lived. Jung also, we touched on this, wrote his Liber Novus, the Red Book, which he showed you, but he also wrote this other book, Ion, which is the researches into the phenomenology of self, which is also worth reading. Jung, though, wrote many, many books. I honestly don't know how many, but it could be 50 or 60 books. Here's Ion, so people can see. Oh, wait, let me just put this thing up there so you can see.
We have to reverse the cameras.
Yeah, but these are all incredibly deep, and we haven't begun to mine all of the insights that he came up with. So then, after introducing Jung, we go off into his interactions on synchronicity, and this involved Pauli, a theoretical physicist who met with Jung, since they both lived in Zurich. they spent a lot of time, and then they wrote letters. Pauli was one of these people that liked to write letters rather than write papers for physics. So his letters were treasured, but he also shared his dreams. He would get up in the morning and write down in incredible detail a dream that he had. And so Jung went through all of his dreams as well. And
They were like dreams about physics.
yeah, well, there are all kinds of dreams.
Well, and what, time and space and.
Right. So anyway, so what we're going to cover here is just what Jung had to say. Then we touched on the Ira Progoff's book. Liz Green is an astrologer, a very deep thinker who dealt with this. Here's another book by Liz Green, The Astrology of Fate.
That's considered to be her Pluto book. She has books on most of the major planets. She's my favorite astrologer. She's in England now, but was born in America, but I think she identifies as English now. And she had a school there for many years. I would have loved to have gone. And it's going online now. So someday we might be able to subscribe.
Right.
They shut down for a while to completely, during the pandemic, to restructure. But it will be like a Zoom school. But you can really study in depth and get training and practice. Sorry, that's my phone going in the background.
This notion of synchronicity, of having disparate events get linked up somehow, shows up. And when you work in the I Ching, when you actually are doing these divinations, you are effectively doing this. A different way is to draw cards rather than have these sticks, and that leads you to the tarot. Do you want to say anything there?
Well, it's the same kind of synchronicity. People who do it, working within a Jungian mindset, we feel we are tapping into the field of synchronicity. And that's where the divination comes from. The cards aren't causing events, and events aren't causing the cards to come up in a particular order any more than your time of birth for a chart. But the I Ching, when you toss the coins, the Chinese valued it because it was random. They felt it was a higher wisdom than you could reach just using your own mind. And I find when I want the deepest wisdom, I go to the I Ching because it feels so other. It's not from my conscious mind at all. It's from a much deeper place. But
you still draw cards. You still draw.
Yeah,
tarot.
I do tarot, sometimes every day, sometimes several times a week. Not to see what's going to happen on Thursday, but at this point, I'm looking at trends and patterns and things, and they're based on archetypes. So you kind of see, and there's a Kabbalistic kind of tarot that you can do. It's all based on the tree of life. That's kind of the deep level understructure of the tarot, which was popularized in Europe. But the thought is, and the structure is said to come from Kabbalah, from Hebrew Kabbalah. There's Hermetic Kabbalah, which is so-called Western or Christian Kabbalah. They weren't really literal Christians, but and then the Hebrew Kabbalah. It would be more based on the tree of life, but they all have correspondences.
Sure.
And it's all based on the synchronicity of what comes up in a spread, in a reading at a particular time. At that moment, you're looking at the potentials of that moment as it's shown symbolically. And I find I just always get insight that I never would have scratched the surface of. without it. It's also considered to be a book of wisdom, the I Ching and the Tarot. And a guy named Aleister Crowley, you might have heard of, he's considered to be kind of a flaky occultist, but he did a work that was really a masterpiece called 777, which really laid out the correspondences in a diagram between the tarot and the I Ching.
Yeah, and Paul Foster Case also was a master of tarot and how to interpret these things. So all of these things are different aspects of what you would call synchronicity. Jung, while he was a psychotherapist, actually he taught himself astrology apparently, and he did a natal chart for pretty much every single one of his clients. It just that he never talked about it. But
he didn't do it with the people that he prepared them for. But he consulted it for himself, for his own frame of reference.
right. And what we would argue here is that there's some linkage between synchronicity and the way that we saw information being moved around in these compactified dimensions that Ron Cowan pointed the way toward. So that's what we're going to try and cover there.
I started really studying and doing astrology like 35 years ago. And I always considered myself to be a synchronistic Jungian astrologer, which meant that I saw it as being acausal. But now, since spending more time with Bart and exchanging ideas with him in the past couple of years, my thinking is becoming more causal than it ever was, but in a very different way. I see causality in a whole different way. And that's kind of what Jung and Polly uncovered in their dialogue, which evolved over decades. And I used to get very frustrated reading the earlier works, but I finally realized, well, they outgrew the early perspective. And specifically on this question of what causality is, we tend to have a simplistic model of it. You let go of the ball and it falls on the ground and it hits the ground and it bounces. It's not that simple. It's far more complicated because we aren't operating in just 3 dimensions of space.
So at this point, we go into wait, there's a question here. Hold on. Oh, evolutionary consciousness. That's what Bud is calling this. Okay. Again, what Jung called it was collective unconscious, but it evolves. It's an evolutionary consciousness, whatever you want to call it.
Exactly, because as we evolve, people around us evolve. So humanity collectively evolves, and that's what I've been exploring is evolutionary consciousness. Because
Right.
mankind has a greater consciousness than we did 100 years ago.
Right.
That's right. That's right.
And together, and in connection with one another, whether people are actually talking about these things or not.
What we do now is we spiral back into the science side, but now we go into the macrocosm with astronomy, cosmology, and astrology. So astronomy is going to be dealing with the observations of the motions of the planets and their moons, the stars, the nebulae, the clusters of stars, the galaxies, and so forth. So that's astronomy has very much to do with gathering data. The cosmology is much more trying to interpret this on a large scale. And so we end up with this notion of a so-called Big Bang that would create the universe that we see around us. And we're going to be arguing that there was no Big Bang, there was a big bounce, but there wasn't anything that went bang, and it wasn't big either. It was quite small. But these terms are very catchy. Big Bang, caught on. And so we're going to deal with big mounts, and we'll point you to some sources for why it appears that there really was a bounce rather than a bang. And then we go off into astrology here. And
Did you
again,
say astronomy?
no, astronomy is up here.
Okay,
And astronomy, this is a screw up in my formatting these things. I'll go fix this.
okay.
But astrology goes up with the head is
Oh,
up
I
here.
see, okay.
Yeah, that's my screw up.
It's okay.
Astrology, here we're dealing with each of the planets, including the sun and the moon. And it appears that these each have their own archetypes, a la Jung, and that those archetypes, as they move around through the heavens, have impact on us here on Earth, and on each of us in its own way. And there is a significant amount of statistical evidence for astrology that it is in fact statistically valid, which of course people don't like to hear. But we'll look at the data and you can judge for yourself. And then we'll just touch upon astrology really started off especially in the Middle Ages, in the church-run universities in what was
Well,
the-
it was really in the Roman Church in Italy. But also in France, in the medieval European cycle of development of it. I mean, but it really came from the Middle East.
Right,
Like
right.
Mesopotamia.
Yeah, and through the Muslim and Islam
Right.
activities coming through Spain. So each of these universities, if you went to them, you would actually be studying a lot of what we would call astrology and/or astronomy. There, that was actually part of the curriculum.
In Dante's time, you could major in it at a university, and it was required study to just have at least some introductory understanding of it.
Right.
And he was really kind of one of the founding fathers of the Renaissance, coming out of the Middle Ages, which I came to feel as I studied it more. It was actually kind of a dark age.
But it was pretty enlightened. You shouldn't dismiss that this other individual, Paracelsus, was an incredible alchemist, but he was searching for perfection, for this collective unconscious that he thought would allow him to turn lead into gold. But it was really drawing on the powers of the higher realms to be able to do this.
He wanted to prove the perfection. It wasn't about the gold, it was about the perfection.
And then we have anomalies like this discovered site in southeastern Turkey called Göbekli Tepe, which is a series of stone circles there, a la Stonehenge. But the difference is that Stonehenge is probably 3,000 years old or so, something like that. Göbekli Tepe is 10,000 BC. So the time period between when Göbekli Tepe was built and the pyramids is greater than the time period from the pyramids to today. So what in the world are these people doing putting up these stone circles? And they're very well thought out, very well engineered. And it draws on, again, astronomy and astrology in terms of what they were doing. We don't have anything written out of this, but it's clear that that was underlying what they were trying to do. In other words, this has been around for a long time. Why doesn't this thing want to move? My thing quit. Hold on a second. It doesn't like this.
Is that for too long? Can you refresh?
I have to go through. There we go. I finally got there.
Oh, I don't have my copy of Hamlet's Mill.
Okay, so we'll go back to, hold on. So the other things that we touched on here were Hamlet's Mill, which is really a book on all of these things: astronomy, astrology, and mythology and astrology. That shows that these things have been there for tens of thousands of years. They're clearly important to people. And what is it? We'll run through in some more detail a statistical analysis of astrology by Monsieur Gauquelin, who started off believing that astrology was actually nothing to pay any attention to, and then was convinced through his statistical data analysis that there really was something there. And that was backed up by a second individual here looking at data analysis. We'll look at Jungian astrology. That was the book that we saw by Liz Green here. And then we'll ask ourselves the what is the planets, the how are the different signs, the where are the houses, the different houses that the planets are in, and then the why is the interpretation versus the predictions. And this all starts with looking at a natal chart where you need your time of birth to the minute, as well as the date and place and the ephemeris to be able to construct all these things. So that's what we'll spend some time on. We'll go back here to Jung and Pauli and just these letters that they came up with. And synchronicity was only one thing. There was a variety of things that they dealing with, especially symmetries and the so-called yin and yang, pluses and minuses, and trying to come up with contrasts or different ways of looking at things. And so it took them basically from 1932 through World War II for them to build up enough of a vocabulary so that after World War II, from 1945 on, was really when they put together all of these ideas that they came up with about not simply synchronicity, but symmetries and yin and yang and all of these things that we see around us. Then we go into walking meditation, which is the labyrinth. Do you want to? The thing that we started with here was Chartres Cathedral, where there's a rose window there. But the rose window by itself is mirrored on the floor of the cathedral.
It's like a hinge.
If you just had the wall fold down, it would hit the floor. The rose window would lay exactly on the floor, and on the floor of the cathedral is a labyrinth, which is what the rose window displays.
It's 42 feet across.
So
They went to a lot of trouble to build it, and I think it was 1301. They dragged marble from Wales to Chartres, north of Paris, on logs being dragged by horses. Made it with blue and white marble in the floor of the cathedral. It was a lot of work, a lot of effort to go to.
there were other similar structures to this. You have Stonehenge, which is there in England, and clearly they've discovered it's much more massive than just what you see on the surface. A lot of it is got buried in the grounds around it. But if you go to the south coast of Brittany, there's something that makes Stonehenge look small, which is called Karnak. But here the stones are small stones. They're only a foot tall or so, 2 feet tall, but they're arrayed over a huge area. And you have to ask yourself, why in the world did people put these things together to go do this? There's another side to it, which is why walk it? Many people, when they walk the labyrinth, they actually end up being caught up in what we call walking meditation. That they actually can tune out on all of the noise around them and get much more centered. And there's only one way in or one way out of the labyrinth, so you're never getting lost as long as you just make sure that you follow the one path. You will always end up either in the middle and then you turn around and come out, or
It seems to activate the brain in a particular way. And if you look at it, it looks like a cross section of the brain from the top. Do we have an image there?
I don't see,
It's not
what
working.
yeah. Just a sec. Let's see if we can.
But some people feel it's the only way they know to meditate is while walking a labyrinth. One of our old directors of religious education said, it's the only way I can really meditate,
Yeah.
because it busies the mind in a certain way. You can get past it.
And we might try, and do something like this. We have the winter solstice coming up. We'll see if we could do something there
We did one in June
for
the
the summer solstice.
that some people came to. And Barbara did a wonderful Ho'oponopono ceremony from Hawaii. It's a Hawaiian traditional chant and the spiritual practice really of forgiveness. And she led us in it. For the people who were present, we couldn't broadcast it. We'll hope to have the technology worked out. But we were able to bring her into the sanctuary in the church in June. And it was just lovely. It was really very special with the labyrinth there filling the sanctuary.
Right. So that takes us to our final concluding section. And here we're looking for parallels, we're looking for intersections, we're looking for, again, this is the mysticism where science, art, and religion meet. And so we try and touch on all these things and summarize them at the very end. And we're going to draw on work by Stephen Phillips, who is a Brit, and he has this graphic that he composed here. So you see up here in the top left of the graphic is the tree of life from the Kabbalah. In the very top middle is the Sri Rantra from Hinduism. In the top right is the I Ching. In the what's in the middle, by the way, is what is called the subquark, which is 3 subquarks make 1 quark, and it has 10 strings. If you look at it, there's actually 10 of these strings that run around. They're all closed strings, and all of these things are linked to the vibrations of this subquark. In the bottom left here, we have an icosahedron, which is a Platonic 3-dimensional solid. Here are the other Platonic solids here, the tetrahedron, the cube, the pyramid, and so forth. And then on the bottom right, there are 3 different tori or toruses or donuts, and they create 3 different circles. which all creates this, what we call sacred geometry. That is what Stephen Phillips picked up on. And it's what the Kabbalah, which we have up here, the Kabbalah, apparently the mystics in the Kabbalah sensed all this and were very much into the geometries underlying what modern physics has. So you tell me how people in 1400 AD were able to come up with this stuff, but they sure did.
And it's thought that it was much older than that. It was an oral tradition before it started being recorded in 1400
Right.
or 1300.
So we're going to just conclude this thing, just drawing on some quotations from David Bohm, who is an outstanding physicist, theoretical physicist. He's no longer with us, but David came to the conclusion in the 1960s that theoretical physics was going to hit the wall and they needed new ideas. And these new ideas he felt had to come from the East. So he spent a lot of time with Eastern mystics, and he concluded that there were two new notions here. One he called the explicate, which is what we see around us, the world around us. And then there's the implicate, and the implicate controls the explicate. And this is what he tried to build a theory on. What Ron Cowan did was he observed, again, these compactified dimensions are in fact where David Bohm's implicate would be, and what happens there, the actions there, especially with the information that's there, control the fields that we see around us of different sorts, and they also involve shaping the particles that we see all around us that make everything. So David Bohm is a very key figure in all of this. Of course, his reward for doing this was he got ostracized by the physics community, but it doesn't mean he was wrong. It just means he was ahead of his time. Nina had a movie, which is an interview documentary of David Bohm. Nina, do you want to say anything about that?
I think she had to sign
Oh,
off.
did Nina sign off?
She had to go early.
Oh, okay. Oh, Nina, okay. Well, we'll see if we can go look at that movie because I thought it was thought-provoking. He ended up really spending a lot of time. He was viewed as one of the really great physicists in the late middle 50s, and unfortunately he ran into Senator Joe McCarthy from Wisconsin, who ended up saying he was a communist, and his US passport was revoked, and he ended up, he was outside the US at this time and couldn't come back. It was that sort of thing. So that's when he decided, okay, I'll take a fresh look at everything. And so he did. So that's what we've got. Any comments, any questions on anything? I'm gonna get out of screen sharing here. We're gonna start off next time with subject 1, which is the foundations, and we'll build on that. Try and develop a common language, a common framework for trying to talk about these things, and we'll see how we make out there.
So we'll be repeating everything that we just went over in the past few weeks. We'll be doing that in depth. We usually end up spending at least 2 weeks on each section
Yeah, or more.
that we
So.
just highlighted. Yeah, at least 2 weeks.
Yeah. So this is just the very fast view. Yes.
Well, a couple of thoughts. I'm a dreamer. When it scared me when I first started, it first started happening. But I would have these pictures in my mind